Hello SRG team, this is Les Bennett, Learning and Development Manager with the Stewart Restaurant Group. In today's video, I want to talk about this gray strip that we find in our Velocity fryer. It's called a cam filler. Now, having working with hundreds of Velocity fryers over the years, I can tell you that even with new fryers, this is usually the first part that goes out on any fryer. Now, in today's video, we want to discuss what's the big deal. This strip goes out, my fryer still works just fine. Why do I even need to bother replacing it? We'll discuss that today. And then we'll also discuss the process of actually replacing one. So let's dive on in. So what tools and parts do I need for this project? Well, I'm going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. That's going to take the lid off, but it'll also take this frame off, which I need to take off in order to get to the cam filler. Once I get the cam filler out, I'm going to want to be able to clean this track in here. So I'm going to need some kind of sharp object, either a flathead screwdriver or maybe just a scraper. I'm going to need perhaps a hammer. We'll see as we get in there, and I'll explain that. We'll want some cam fillers and some cam filler guides. Also, in addition, you're probably going to want some kind of degreaser or cleaning agent and plenty of towels. Since we have the lid off, since we're replacing the fillers, this is really a good opportunity to clean the inside of the lid while we have it apart. So on this fryer, I have the top cover off. This fryer is in good working condition. We have our cam fillers. We have the cam filler guide right here. This just allows the filler to sit in there properly. Often what's going to happen is when you get into the cover and you have broken cam fillers or missing ones, you'll find this guide. It's going to be shattered into about a dozen pieces laying in there. But this one's in good working condition. So the question we may have is, what's the big deal if this filler goes out? Well, what's going to happen is you're going to get grease into the cavity here. Now, what's that going to do? Well, it could eat away at your pressure pad, which is going to cause steam to leak out the side. But the more common things is that grease can get into the wire in here, or even our upper lid locking pin. And these are the components that tell the control panel that your fryer is under pressure or not under pressure. So if these go bad, if they get a lot of grease on them, you can have E84C, E84D air codes. You can also have, inside this lid, there's a hollow space, there's a cavity. It's called a lid liner. But in there, there's a lower lid locking pin, and that's what actually locks this in place. It's what locks our lid in place, and that part cannot be replaced. So what's going to happen is grease can get into these ports, these holes. So whenever cleaning this area, make sure these holes have been cleaned out, because air needs to come out of those. But what can happen is grease can get into those. It can get into this lower lid locking pin and actually gum it up and damage it, and it cannot be replaced. So unfortunately at that point, we're going to be spending about $3,500 to replace a lid. So it's actually a lot better if we just replace the $15 strip before we even get to this point. And again, that's a very rare point that you would get to a point where that part got damaged, but those are things that could happen. So now let's talk about how we actually replace the cam fillers and the cam filler guide. So to replace the cam filler, the first thing we have to do is remove this frame right here. And to do that, we're going to have 3 Phillips head screws that we have to replace. Now the problem you're going to have is if your cam filler has gone out, your entire cavity is probably going to be filled with grease. You might not even be able to see these screws because they're going to be completely covered in grease. But what you can look for is right above each one is a hole. So use that as your guide, and you're going to be able to go down and unscrew these. Now, having done this many times, these screw heads are very soft. And if you're replacing a bunch of these over time, most of the time the screws are going to come out, but eventually you're going to come across a situation where that screw just does not want to come out. It's in there, and what's going to happen is you might strip the head of the screw. And if you strip the head of the screw, you're not going to be able to get it out. You're going to need a screw extractor. It's just going to be a bigger process. So one tip we might have, I'll show you here. This is where the hammer is going to come into play. If you're in a situation where a screw does not want to come undone, what's probably going to happen is the head of the screw is filled with grease. And you're just not even getting the screwdriver in there all the way. I'm going to show you a method here to help you get that screw out. So if you do have a screw that's not coming undone and you feel like you might be stripping it, what you can do is line the screwdriver the best you can over the head of the screw. What you can do is take a hammer and pound that into that screw, trying to get that in there. That hopefully will get a lot of the grease out of the head of the screw, and it'll hopefully help the screwdriver to get in there better. And then what you can do is take a towel, put it over the top, and the towel will give you some grip. Put your weight on top of the screwdriver, and then you can kind of turn. And this is usually what I'll do if I have a troublesome screw, and it usually gets it in most situations. Now that I got my screws out, I can remove this frame. Now, if you haven't done this before or you're a little unfamiliar with what you're doing, the best thing is only do one side at a time. You can use this side as kind of a reference as you take this one apart. So what I can do now then is, might have to maneuver my hand a little bit, but this frame should be able to come out now. Got that out. This might go in the fog tank. Now at this point, you either don't have a strip or you probably have a broken one in here. This can come out. And then if you had to get in there, you can pop this filler out too. Most of the times you won't even have one of these in there. It'll be broken. This one will have to kind of wiggle out because of the bars over it. But I'm going to take all this out now, and then we'll kind of look at what it need to do to clean it. Now that I get everything apart, what I'm looking at here is this channel right here. This is where that strip was at. This is really what I need to clean out. Right now, even this one has some grease in there. So I'm going to put some degreaser in there. There's no real surefire way to do this. Either a scraper, I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver, I'm going to get degreaser in there. I can wedge a towel in there. But I'm going to try to clean out this channel. I'm going to move my lid so I can get both sides. And I'm going to get in there, I'm going to clean out this channel as best I can. And then also in this process, you're going to want to probably clean up in this area right here. Because as that strip wraps around, it needs a clear space to go. So kind of get this area cleaned. I'm going to clean here. Hopefully, if you had the lid apart, you'd clean everything. But at the minimum, we want to make sure these areas are cleaned. And then we'll kind of go from there. Now that I have my channel cleaned out, to where I think I got everything out of there, it's nice and clean, it's been dried, I'm now going to take this guide, and it's going to go on this thicker metal right here. Not the thinner outer one, but the thicker one. It'll fit on there nice and snug. So let me put that on. Then after that, we'll actually put the cam filler itself on. I now have my cam filler guide on there. Got on there nice and snug. And it left just enough space for me to put the filler right in between. That filler is going to go right between this frame and this bar right here. It's going to slide right in here, and it's going to go right along this groove. And as I look at the filler, there's actually two sides to it. There's a shorter side and a longer side. The shorter side is going to be near the back of the lid, and the longer side will be near the front of the lid. And if you're not sure, if you're just doing one at a time, always look over at the other side. But again, the shorter side is going to go near the back of the lid, the longer side near the front, and it's going to be sliding in right in here. Now, having done hundreds of these, I wish there was just an easy way to explain how it's done, but you really just got to work it in. You're going to have to work the edges of the filler into the grooves. I'll put one in. These are pretty tough. You can use a little muscle on it as you're putting it on, but I usually try to get the back in first, and then I work towards the front end. So first I'm going to try to put the back end in here. And what I want to do is I usually try to get the corner right here into the groove first. And I might have to kind of pull this apart to get it over the bar. But as I do that, now I'm working at just trying to get this very little corner here. I'm trying to get that first into the groove. Then I got to make sure this piece is wrapped around. Okay, you can see I got this side in. Now I'm going to go over and just try to do the same with the back side, which probably is a little easier, which I did. So now at this point, it's in the groove. So I still have to replace the frame. But as you look now, even on this side, everything's in the groove. This has to wrap around. I should be able to move it back and forth. Right, now I'm going to put the frame back on. And this has to go between the filler and the bar. So I'm just going to try to get it over the top of it. It's going to drop in there. And I got to also get it on the back side here. I have to make sure that nothing's caught. And as I put it back on, I'm just double checking to make sure everything is still in there, which everything is. So I'm good there. So if I come around to the front, everything's back on. What I need to watch for here is this all needs to be cleared. One issue you might have is this little gasket back here just gets warped over time. And I've actually had to remove the gasket right here. Now, if the gasket's long enough, like is it on this side, I can just try to tuck it in behind the frame. Even here it's bubbling out a little bit. But what can happen is if this gasket bubbles out too much, every time this opens and closes, it starts to bang against it. So sometimes I actually had to remove a chunk of the gasket just so I have a clear space for the filler to move. But I got everything there. Now I can just put the screws back in. Now as I put the screws back in, one tip I've learned over time is, as I start, I only have this in halfway. I went to the next one, only did that halfway. That gives me a little bit of movement. That way, because sometimes what might happen is if you put that one tight and that one tight, what might happen is this final hole is not lined up, right? So by having enough wiggle room, I can make sure that this final hole is lined up. Then once I get that final screw in, then I can go back and tighten the rest of them. Now that I've tightened the screws, before I put the lid cover back on, this is again a great opportunity to make sure that this inside cavity has been cleaned out. Just being careful not to clip any of the wires that are in here. It's also a great opportunity while the cover's off to check my pressure pads to see if they need to be replaced or flipped around. Now, as far as maintenance goes on these cam fillers, what happens is over time they get grease on them. So as the lid's being opened and closed, that grease is producing friction and it's just wearing them apart and tearing them apart. So the way to maintain these so they last longer would just to be to take a towel with some degreaser on it and just to wipe them down from the outside here, kind of open and close the lid, wipe them down. It's also a great opportunity, while we didn't talk about the back strips, these strips take several hours to replace and they protect the inside of the cavity, back cavity here. So while we're cleaning these, it's a great opportunity to put degreaser on these and then open and close the lid and just kind of clean them to make sure that they can move freely also. Now, if you do these things, hopefully it'll save you a lot of headaches in the future as far as issues within the lid itself.